Happy Peoplecast. I'm Sophia Lemon, and today I am talking to Ariela Koldorf of Spectrum of Light Support Services. Hello, Ariela. How are you?
I am wonderful. How are you, Sophia?
Apparently feeling very fancy in how I speak this morning.
And I am mimicking that. So it's going to be a nice, fancy time. I'm happy to be here, though.
So I'm so glad that you are here. And I just want to start off with you just telling us who you are and what you do and how you do it and why you do it.
Right. Okay. So obviously, you have my name, Ariela. Okay. So I have been, I graduated as a child youth worker like 20 years ago. So, I have 20 years experience working with lots of different folks, mental health, developmental disabilities, autism, the whole gamut, lots of behavior. And I really developed a passion for just working with folks who present with really unique and complex needs and unique and complex behavior, and really diving in and understanding kind of what is happening for them, and how we can support them in just experiencing more success and safety and happiness. So, um, yeah, I kind of just spent the past 20 years doing a whole bunch of jobs, which I'm sure we'll get into in a couple of minutes. And um, I wanted to kind of be able to offer something of my own. And so I kind of came up with Spectrum of Light Support Services and thought I would get out there and hustle and help families that need the help.
I love
I feel like I haven't answered that well, but we'll keep going.
it.
Oh no, you're frozen again.
Can you hear me though? As long as you can hear me, we're good. Uh-oh.
Oh, this is going to be interesting with the freezing, but that's okay.
It
We'll
is
get
it
through
is
it.
okay. Um okay. I love it.
Where did you lose me?
Yeah. I was just saying I love it. I love what you do. So let's just start out by maybe talking about some of the challenges that some of the people you might be supporting are facing. So you
Yeah,
support the caregivers, correct?
I do. I do. So I've spent 20 years supporting the individual, um, but I realize that there's a huge gap in the system,
Mhm.
and that caregivers don't really have that support readily available for them. And to top it off, I am one of those caregivers who, my son, I have a neurodivergent son. So there are days where I'm just like, what am I doing? And I have no idea what I'm doing. And I can kind of take a step back and realize if this is hard for me, who knows where to go, knows what to do, like knows what there is to know, I can't even imagine how hard it is for other people. So I do. I support the caregiver, whether it's a parent, a family member, professional care provider. Doesn't have to be a parent of a child. It could be a family member of an older person experiencing some needs. Um, and I work with them to kind of look at what's going on, understand the behavior, why it's happening, um, what the behavior is communicating, because all behavior is communication, and how they can better support, how they can respond more effectively. I don't do it for them. I work with them. So it is a coaching. Um, I'm not here to tell you how to love your family member or how to work with your person. I'm here to guide you. I'm here to have you take a step back, uh, reframe your thinking, maybe, look at their behavior differently and kind of figure out, okay, what's going to work for us? What's going to work for me? What is realistic? How can we try it? And I kind of support in that way, because life is life. And I can come in and say, do A, B, and C, but that's not going to work for you,
Mhm.
right? Just like, what you do in your home wouldn't work for me necessarily. So my intention is to kind of support you in, with, of course, my expertise, but support you in kind of figuring out how to best support your loved one.
Okay, so we are so on the same page. Because I
Yes,
realize that, not all strategies are going to work the same for all families. Like
of
I have
course.
learned in my line of work, because I work with a lot of children and I have parents who are feeling insecure about coming to a photo session just because of their, we'll say, normally functioning child. They're afraid of what their behavior might be. and the different types of communication that I have employed to work with kids who on the surface are normal but in a moment might be struggling, you know is different for each of those kids. Because some kids it's like take a break and let them decompress. Some kids it's like I make fun of them and then they're like, oh, it is on, photographer lady. um, but why don't we take a look at the types of behaviors that these individuals might be exhibiting to sort of get an idea of what people might be dealing with? Because I realize that these terms are reasonably new. This neurodivergent term is becoming more popular. So, like, what are the types of things that a person you're going to coach is struggling with in their day to day life, or addressing, or observing, or what are they seeing that's requiring them to get some help?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, the term neurodivergent is kind of new. And to be honest, I always say this, calling somebody neurodivergent or, developmentally disabled, I don't like that because really, who's normal? Nobody's normal. What is normal? I'm not normal.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And when I say normal, I mean it with huge quotation marks.
Yeah.
And what's neurotypical, right? So I guess neurotypical is a typically developed brain, but really, I struggle with all that. I really do believe that everybody is their own normal.
Hi, I'm Becky Waples, the host of the Small Towns Big Dreams podcast. The podcast that celebrates small town creators and shares their stories. From their background to where they found their courage, from their challenges to their wins, from where they found their inspiration to how they took their first step. Join us each week to hear how each guest turned their big dreams into reality. If you are a creator, an entrepreneur, or love someone who is, subscribe now to the Small Towns Big Dreams podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and let's grow together.
I'm Lauren Best, and in my podcast, I have conversations with compelling creatives and answer your questions. I dive into what I've learned as a voice coach and performance poet, and share why over 15 years of music leadership has shaped my collaborative approach. I reveal how I've reawakened my own creativity. Subscribe to my new show, Lauren's Best, wherever you get your podcasts. Join me on Substack for exclusive bonus content, laurenbest.substack.com.
Hey, listen up. Tamara here from the Clean It Club podcast interrupting. Sorry, not sorry. I just wanted to let you know that if you love this podcast, you might just love the Clean It Club as well. We are all about deep cleaning our lives from the inside out, digging those skeletons out of our closets and letting go of what no longer serves us. So roll up your sleeves, dust off those life lessons, and join me and my friends as we learn how to navigate our way to a life with more love, more laughter, and maybe less piles of laundry. Find the Clean It Club podcast on Spotify.
Right? Whether you're super duper, higher functioning, or I don't like the term low functioning, but if you have, different needs and different abilities. So I do use that language because that's language people kind of tend to understand, but I don't love it. Now, with that being said, absolutely. I don't only work with people who have a developmental disability, right? I work with neurotypical kids because let's face it, being a parent is being a parent, or servicing a child, camp, daycare, church, whatever, photography is challenging. So things like tantrums, meltdowns, and they are different. Things like, self-injurious behavior, things like aggression, running away. The hardest one is non-compliance, when the kid just won't do it. That is 20 years, and that's still hard for me. But those typically are the kinds of things that are addressed, because people come to me when they're like, listen, here's what's happening. It's happening every day, and I just don't know what to do, right? So, I like to leave the big, huge, like therapeutic things that are going to take years to change to the other professionals that are there for that reason. I'm here to guide you. So if, your kid is throwing a tantrum every day at bedtime, bath time, after school, whatever it may be, or if it's this big emotional response and you don't know how to manage it, or if you're being hit, or if they're banging their head against the wall, those are the kinds of pieces. Or if you just find that they won't do what you tell them to do, or they won't, engage in anything, those are really the kind of pieces that I focus on, because those are the kind of pieces that you can change your responses to pretty rapidly at home, right? Whereas something bigger or more, I guess, ingrained or intense, that is going to take kind of years of slow progress work, that's when I will refer you to another professional that does that job, because I like to do what I do well, and I stay in my lane, right? And I like to kind of share. I believe in working together and having a team behind you.
That's really good. I want to take a quick sort of break just to talk about these
Yeah.
terms. So if you're not
Yeah.
watching the video for this episode, you're going to miss a lot of air quotes.
Oh, yes, that's true. I do.
Yeah.
I talk a lot with my hands, if you haven't noticed. So,
I think it's necessary at this particular moment in time because,
Yeah.
Ariela, the number of adults who have said to me in recent history, oh, I've been diagnosed as high functioning autistic. I'm like, yes, we all are. As far as I'm concerned, if this is a spectrum, like we all fall on it somewhere. It's a rather big spectrum. And this
Right.
whole normal thing is going to screw with people's minds.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is, right? It's a spectrum. So, I went through the journey of having my son diagnosed with ADHD and a learning disability. And I knew this about him when he was way young. He's 9 now. I knew this when he was like 3. However, we formally got him diagnosed, identified this year. And when I was going through the motions and answering all the questions, I was like, oh, because sometimes you don't realize things about yourself, right? So I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense from when I was younger, or that makes sense from why I can't sit still and I have to do a million things in my life, and why I can't just be, mom with a full-time job and like take your kids to their things. So I think you're right. There is a spectrum, whether it's autism or whatever else. That's why I don't believe in neurotypical with my air quotes,
Yep.
because really, like, there's such a spectrum for everyone. And the more I get to know people, the more, as I grow up, as I like to say, I'm 43, but I'm still growing up. But as I meet people in my life, I realize, like, when we're young, we think everybody around us is normal and we're the odd one out. No, we're all the odd ones out, right? So I agree with you. I think everyone's got something. What is good, though, is when you do get identified or diagnosed with something, you understand, you have more retrospect, and it unlocks services, it unlocks funding, it unlocks support. So that is why people do get diagnosed, because they can now access things that they couldn't access earlier, right? And that's why I am a big fan of getting identifications, especially for kiddos in school, because then they can get the support they need.
Yeah, I love that.
So-
And there's obviously a lot of kids these days even who are not going to be diagnosed with this, that, and the other thing. And
Yes.
maybe they get a diagnosis and maybe you do absolutely nothing with it because maybe the diagnosis is not a challenge for them right now. Maybe it will be at
Exactly.
some point. Maybe there's nothing for you to do. Maybe they're just, now you know. In a case like your son's, I'm sure it makes his experience inside of school so much easier for him, which ultimately means he's going to have a better experience just getting educated. So he's going to have a different relationship with education than someone in his position would 20 years ago.
Exactly.
So it just can change his life that way, just because schools are not designed to have 30 kids in one classroom all learning the same way. Well, that's how they are designed, but it doesn't work,
So I spent 15 years working in the education system until about 3 years ago. And so, yeah, you are absolutely right. We are trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And again, it's not the educator's fault. I mean, I know a ton of teachers and support staff, and they're incredible people who work hard, and, they get a bad rap. It is not easy to be in these buildings. It really isn't. I have a friend who has recently done some time in volunteering at a school. I can't speak today. And she was like, holy moly, it is eye-opening. Right? So you're right. My son's journey is becoming different. It is newer, but it's interesting how he sees himself differently and understands himself differently, because now we have language for it. So before his identification, I didn't really call certain things out. Whereas now I do. Now I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is why this is happening for you. And it's interesting to see a 9-year-old kind of change his perception of himself. It was kind of negative at first because he's got this thing. But yeah, we work really hard at not, like, it is what it is, right? It doesn't mean you're worse than anyone else. And at school, we're working really hard on getting him the supports he needs so that he can feel more successful. He's a super smart kid. He doesn't feel it. And so I want
Yeah.
those two things to blend together, right? So that he can feel like, okay, yeah, no, I do well. I just need to do it in a different way. And so
Yeah.
that's what it's all about.
I love that. Like learning that, maybe reading your test is not going to be the way that you do it. Maybe this other way will work better for you. Like all of this
Exactly.
makes so much sense for me. Like I love it so much. Like, and I love that you said that it's about communicating, because
Yes.
it seems to me that I'm going to use the word all you do is you're teaching them people how to communicate better. So this behavior's happening. What are you doing? Are you freaking out? Because that's probably not going to help the situation.
Right. But it's funny because, I talked about tantrums and
Yes.
meltdowns really quickly. I brought those two things up. So, tantrums are things that are controlled. Someone throws a tantrum when they're trying to avoid or escape a task or directive or whatever. They're usually in control of their behavior. They're pretty aware of their surroundings. They're not really going to hurt themselves. And they're looking for a response or a reaction from the other person. So it's when a kid, throws a tantrum and kind of looks at you to see what you're going to do. That's a tantrum. A meltdown is something completely different. It is not a controlled thing.
Mhm.
It is something that is triggered by sensory or something precipitating, and you just have this big emotional release. And this is when you don't really have awareness of who's around you or what you're doing. Maybe you'll hurt yourself. Maybe you'll throw a couple of things.
Mhm.
But you need to have that release. And then when it's done, you are ready to move on. So I like to separate those two things because, a lot of times people will come to me and say, "Oh, my kid keeps having a tantrum and I don't know what to do about it." But they're not, right? And I think understanding the difference. So a tantrum is, what are you trying to communicate? And that's not going to work for you. Like you're not going to get your way or you're not going to get to avoid that task just because you're laying on the floor kicking and screaming.
So kicking and screaming in the grocery store because they want candy and they're not getting it.
Tantrum.
Okay.
Yes. However, Mom, you promised me we were going to go play soccer and now we can't because it's raining and that's not fair. And I'm feeling big things about it. And I'm going to have my moment. Meltdown, right? Because all these emotions and everything is like
Mhm.
bogging your brain. And when your brain already, for our neurodivergent, again, air quotes, folks, processing information is harder. It takes longer. Your brain processes information differently. So when these chain of events happen, your body's reaction is to have this big emotional release. And that is not something you can control. Whereas, Mommy, I want this candy. Mommy says no, and I'm going to kick and scream. So she gives it to me is goal oriented. The goal is Mommy's going to give me that candy. Right. So there's a huge difference between the two.
I think you should just transition to parent coaching.
Well, it is. I mean, caregiver and parent coaching, that's really what it is. But this is a lot of the work I do, right? It's kind of changing people's way of seeing their kid or seeing their loved one. That's really all it is. And then once you can see it differently, and then I can help you come up with some strategies that you feel are going to be effective and you can try them, then life becomes a little bit more manageable. And that's my goal.
This tantrum versus meltdown thing is very interesting to me because I remember when I was in high school, we had an autistic boy come to our school, and he was nonverbal. They had to do all the nonviolent intervention training stuff with like all
which I teach also.
Yes, with the EAs and everything in the school. And I remember, a lot of us students, because we just didn't know what was going on. We're like, like what in the hell when he would get locked into a corridor when they'd, all of a sudden there'd be three people around him and they're just closing the doors and that's it. And he's kicking and screaming in a closed corridor because he's having a meltdown and they're just letting him have it until he's done.
Which is what you need to do. So, and it's funny that you say physical intervention. So I am a CPI, which is the Crisis Prevention Institute. a lot of organizations use it as their verbal de-escalation and physical intervention practice. So I have been teaching that only through my professional, like my, I guess, full-time jobs since 2015. And that you are not supposed to intervene. So a lot of times people would say to me, why don't you just like hold him down? That's not what it's about. So, closing the doors to that corridor and letting him kick and scream with three staff around him is A, keeping you guys all safe in the hallway, B, keeping him safe, and really like visually it shows him, okay, this is your space that you can be safe in right now. Saves us dignity, because really it's not a show. Nobody needs to see what's going on. Like, this is a big thing. And then the staff are there in case they do need to physically intervene, not just to protect themselves, but to protect him. Right. So it isn't just about how am I going to protect myself? Because when I was in the school board, I used to work with all the big high school dudes that would, the nonverbal, and I hate that term too, but the more complex students that needed more support. And those are my favorite students, and people would think I'm crazy, but I'm like, no, like there's so much going on for them that they can't communicate. We have to figure it out. And you see slowly, step by step, as you do figure it out and put things into place, things start to change a little bit, right? As long as you keep things the way that they should be. So I think, behavior is absolutely communication. When you can't say something, you're going to show it. When you can't say, my stomach hurts, I need to go to the bathroom, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm sick, you're going to show it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really simple, I guess, theoretically, but in real life, it is so hard, especially when you're the parent or the family in your home and you live with it, right? There are days where I look at my son, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a bad day. And I mean, he's not super complex, but as a mom, there are days where I'm just like done.
Yeah, or it's just stressful. And I get that too. Yeah. And another thing that I remember about this particular boy, and I just wanted to make this first comment, was I assume another part of it is just physically having the people there for him.
Yes.
He's in this corridor and there are people there with him and they're not doing anything. They're just with him. I'm sure there is a comforting aspect to that as well. In some way. And what else I remember? There was one time we had an assembly and he was just welcome to sort of walk around at his will. And they put some tape down on the floor, to show him his boundary. And he took one step over that tape, and the teacher, who by the way was much smaller than him, just friggin' shoved him back over that piece of tape. And I remember thinking I remember going watching his face, and you just see his face look at the teacher and look at the tape on the floor and look back at the teacher and then go, okay. And just wander off. Yeah. And you learn different ways to communicate with people. And we're talking about when you can't say what you need out loud. Imagine how painful that could be. Well, how many times in your life have you just not said what you felt out loud and it made you feel absolutely terrible? But you have the words to say this thing, know? Now imagine you can't. There's not an option for you to just say the friggin' words. I would absolutely, I can put myself in that position. I've had meltdowns.
I think we all have, though. We all have.
Yeah. And it's so hard to watch someone that you love dealing with that as well. Because you know how it feels.
Yeah. And for those kiddos, that line on the floor, that was a visual prompt, right?
Yeah.
For him to stay within his boundaries, just for safety. Again, for safety of him, safety of the other students, the staff, everybody. And that prompted him. And so he knows what that means. And a lot of these kiddos, they do have augmented communication, or we advocate for that. So the hope is to be able to teach them to communicate through an iPad or whatever it may be. Some folks don't have the capacity to do that. And so we try to find communications in different ways. But yeah, those kiddos like him were just my favorite kiddos to work with when I was at the school board, because they are just the biggest sweethearts. I would always say the biggest, scariest, again, my quotes, kids in the school board were always the most awesome people, because they have so much hidden that you don't know about until you really
Yeah.
get to know them. And you can't get to know them if you're scared of them or if there's always behavior. And I got the best of both worlds. I got to know them because I wasn't afraid to kind of get in there and spend time with them, right? Yeah, it was pretty neat. Pretty neat.
So, as a parent of a child with challenges, and also in your career, what are some signs that a caregiver might be struggling with what's going on at home?
Yeah. I mean, so if they're out with their kid, you can
Yeah.
typically tell, right? Like you can
Yeah.
really tell like the dynamics, right? If a parent is burning out or is really struggling or rolling their eyes when it happens again, like I am probably guilty of doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, it's just through talking, right? I mean,
Mhm.
when a parent will say, "Yeah, we have, our kid's spicy at home." I always used to say
Yeah.
that my son's spicy. Um, then you're like, "Oh, how come? What's going on?" And it's just really talking to parents. So, if they say, "Oh yeah, my little girl Sue always gives me a hard time at bedtime." Oh, that sucks. What happens? Oh yeah, no, it takes me 3 hours to put her to bed. Well, ding ding ding, 3 hours to put her to bed every night. That might be a little bit of a problem, right? We might have to change the way you do things at bedtime
Mhm.
because you're likely um, adding to that 3 hours. Just
Yeah.
what you're doing, what you're saying. Um, everybody knows somebody. Everybody has friends. Everybody has, a family member, a friend who is struggling with either their kid or their older parent, or,
Mhm.
they know somebody at work. And so it's really just about talking to people and just hearing their stories. Um,
Mhm.
and it's one of those things that everybody needs. Like, I probably need a parent coach,
Mhm.
right? Just like therapists need therapy.
Mhm.
It's just one of those things where it's hard to step back when you're in it
Yeah.
and to really be objective about it.
Yeah. And everyone needs a parent coach. Yeah. Probably every
Yeah.
parent. Because I'm thinking about this tantrum versus meltdown thing. And I mean, that happens with every child. And how many
Yep.
parents have the tantrum happening and give in to the behavior? And then, oh shit, now all of a sudden you have established, that you're
A
going to give
pattern.
in. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Bad news bears.
Or how many parents are dealing with a meltdown?
hmm And trying to talk them out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So again, like my son used to have tantrums
Yeah.
and those very quickly turned into meltdowns. And I didn't recognize it until I was like, one day I was like, this is different.
Mhm.
It's different. And I had to really think about why it was different. He was younger. He was like 5.
Mhm.
And it started changing. And I really had to think about, okay, what's different? Like, what's not working? And the things I was doing before were not working. So I had to change the way I responded. And now, because to this day we have meltdowns on a daily basis. But now we've established that when this happens, I probably like, say one or two things to you to kind of like remind you what your choices are. And he'll
Hmm.
usually either go to his room and have his moment, or if he's on the couch, he'll have his moment. And I just kind of walk away, but he knows I'm there, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't leave and go upstairs if he's downstairs, but I kind of like go to the kitchen.
Yeah.
And when he's done, he asks for a hug, and we're good. And he knows, like he's like, "I'm sorry, mom," and we talk about you don't need to apologize. This is just your body's response, but let's learn some strategies to use to maybe
Yeah.
replace some of that behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I assume when you're saying like you're walking away to the kitchen, right? You're not like, "Oh my god, again,"
No,
Exactly.
no,
Yeah.
no. And I mean, listen, there are times where maybe I do. Maybe it's been a rough day and I'm just like, oh,
Yeah.
and he could probably hear me because you think they can't hear you. They can
Uh,
hear you. Um, but I just usually say, okay, let me know when you're done.
yeah.
Because I know that about him. Like he needs that moment. I can't give him
Yeah.
anything in that moment to change it once he's in it. He needs it. And it used to be a 40-minute thing, and now we're down to like usually 2 to 5 minutes, and we're good to go. And of course, afterwards, he needs some time to kind of like decompress and come back. But that big release is usually 2 to 5 minutes now, and he's good to move on.
That's really impressive because I mean, honestly, who has not been in that space where there's just been so much chaos inside their body that they have to just get it the F out? 2 to
Yep.
3 minutes is pretty darn good.
Well,
Holy
yeah, when
moly.
it happens every day, sometimes multiple times a day. But
Yeah.
again, but life is life, and things change, right? And When things don't go your way, and this is the way that you communicate with them, then or you
Yep.
communicate them, um, it is what it is. But he's come along. Like, I'm so proud. He's come such a long way, and that isn't really me. That isn't also an attestation. Is that a word? But to him, and just his ability to understand where he's at, right? And yeah, we've done a lot of hard work, but I also believe in empowering the individual, right? So that is part of the coaching I do with parents too, is it's not just about the parent, but it's also, okay, now how are you going to teach your child or loved one what is happening, why it's happening, and how we're going to try to work on it, because it's
Yeah.
two-sided, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you figure out the difference with your son between a tantrum and a meltdown? And when you're talking to parents, how are you helping them identify the difference between the two? And then how do you sort of help them just, okay, it's okay. Like, you be calm, they'll be calm kind of situation.
Yeah, it's not easy. How did I identify? That's a good question. I think I just recognize, and again, I come to this parenting job with my professional kind of stuff. So I think I just recognized that the tantrums that he used to throw when he was younger, it didn't feel the same anymore. And I think as parents, as people, we can feel that, right? When something isn't the same as it used to be. And I just kind of stepped back and I just kind of said, okay, if I was at work, like observing his behavior, what would I think? What would
Yeah.
be my hypothesis? And I tried different things, right? Like, I tried to redirect him, I tried to prompt him, I tried this, I tried that. And I think, I just started trying to just give him his space, because again, my son is the kind of kid who just needs his time. And that started really working. And I mean, when he started having like really big meltdowns, I remember, I think the longest one he had was like 2.5 hours, and it was like on and off. But um, and I'll never forget that day. That was an emotionally exhausting day for both of us. He
Yeah.
was, again, like 5-ish, and just like, I remember he was upstairs. I ended up going downstairs because I was like, I can't do this. And afterwards, just he was exhausted. And
Yeah.
that's the moment I realized, okay, this wasn't a controlled thing. Like,
Mhm.
he kicked and screamed for 2 hours
Yeah.
over, I don't even remember what. And so that's when I kind of said, okay, I really need to change things up. Um, and to decrease that time, I just put some preventative things in place. And, we talked about, again, he was 5, so using language that's appropriate for a 5-year-old. But pretty much, I told him, when you're having a hard time, mommy's going to come check on you, but mommy's also going to walk away and just let you cry. You tell me when you're ready. And that eventually turned into, I know he's ready when he asks for a hug. My son always asks for a hug when he's done, to this day.
Yellow, ridiculously happy people. I'm interrupting this regularly scheduled content to ask you for a little favor. If this pod has made you laugh, inspired you, or made you think, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment of our shenanigans. And don't be shy. Share the love by leaving a rating and a review. It's like a virtual high five that helps introduce the show to more ridiculously happy people and helps keep me on track with content that you actually want to hear. So grab your device, unless you're driving, tap that subscribe button, give us a 5-star rating, and write a little review about what you think about this episode. Your support means the world to me. And we're back in 3, 2, 1.
I think that's his way of being consoled and of knowing that we still love him. And also that physical, sensory, tight, right? Comfort. So that became our thing. And he will ask myself or my husband for a hug. Sometimes that's his way of saying, come help me calm down. So again, when he first asked me for a hug during a meltdown, I said no. I'm like, no, when you're done. But then I realized, I'm like, oh, he needs this right now. If he's asking me for it, I'm going to give it to him. And I think that's really important too. If it's a true meltdown, if they're asking for something comforting, I'm not saying an object like, oh, a lollipop, but if they're saying, I need a hug, or, I need my pillow, give it to them, because they're asking you for comfort, for calming support. And that's what we started doing. And slowly the time started to decrease, because I think the more he recognized that we have something in place to regulate him or to help him regulate, the more he was able to kind of regulate a little bit quicker. And now we're down to 2 to 5 minutes. And I say 2 to 5 minutes because I time it.
Yeah.
So the average is 2 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I really love that he just asks for what he needs. And I just finished reading, I believe it's called Touch Matters. And just
haven't read that.
Remarkable timing. It's all about the science of touch and the impact that touch has in our lives and how we've become a society that doesn't touch anymore, and the negative impact that that's having on us. And we obviously know, we've known for a while, hugs, squeezing, and the tension is good for everyone.
Yes.
Maybe not at all times, but I just think it's amazing that it's, you figure out it's a meltdown, you give him his space to let it out, and he just naturally figures out what he needs.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, right?
Yeah. It sounds like
really is.
Obviously you helped him through that, but it sounds like he's really figured out what he needs when he needs it for, what he's dealing with at the moment. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty good at advocating for himself and asking for what he needs on a regular basis. And I'd like to think I helped him get there, but I think it's also part of his personality. But yeah, it's pretty neat that he asks for that. And not everybody wants that, right? Like not everybody likes the touch, but a lot of people with developmental disabilities or that are neurodivergent need that sensory input. They need to kind of tell us what that is that they need, because not everybody needs a hug. Some people need a walk. Some people, some people will want water, or some people will want their sensory items. He just so happens to need a hug from someone, like a parent, someone he knows is his person, which is typically my husband or I. He won't ask his grandparents, I don't think, but he also holds it together a lot more when he's in other people's spaces, right? So again, it has to do with feeling safe. I always say, and I always used to tell school staff, the kids that escalate around you feel safest around you, because typically you try to hold it together if you don't feel safe to let it out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. When, out of curiosity, when he's in someone else's space and he's working really hard to keep it together, do you ever find that later in the day he's like exhausted?
Yes. And there will be a release at home for sure. Like he will have a meltdown, but he's good at saying that. He's like, Mom, I worked so hard to stay calm. Or I've seen him have conversations with people. I'm sure he's going to like not be happy with me sharing. He's very open, but he'll be like, Mom, you talked about me too much.
We think he's awesome. So
thanks.
fair.
I think he's pretty awesome. But no, I've seen him have literal conversations with friends or people. And he's good and he's calm and he's using whatever strategies it is that he's using. And as soon as it's done, then I'm like, okay, now we're going to go. And then comes the release. And his release isn't like aggressive or anything. He just has a big emotional outpour.
Yeah.
Whether it's yelling or crying or whatever it may be. And it's never targeted at anybody, which is also cool, because a lot of times it is targeted at other people. He just needs to like let it out, and then he's done. Right. Yeah. And then we can talk about it. And then he's actually really open to talking about what happened, why it bothered him, and to hearing me or his dad or whoever kind of say, well, have you thought about it this way? And the answer is usually no, I'm right. But he is open to hearing it. So I'm hoping one day we can take that extra step of being a little more,
He might be an emotional genius, this kid.
Maybe. He's a genius. Yeah, he's an emotional genius. For a 9-year-old, he's pretty emotionally mature, I gotta say. He's like, the people who know him always say he's like an old man in a 9-year-old's body. He's an old soul. He's hilarious. He's smart. He's caring. He will give you the shirt off his back. He is the friend you want to have, because he'll do anything for the people he loves. Yeah. But he just needs to have his moment sometimes, and that's okay.
You know what? How many adults do you know, though, who throw temper tantrums or meltdowns? Who's really sure with an adult? And then afterward, can't talk about it. Like nothing. We're not talking about the emotions. Let it go, He's obviously surpassed that maturity level, which is really cool.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool kiddo. He's a pretty cool kiddo. But I'm biased, but he is really cool.
You are biased, but you're allowed to think that. He sounds like he's pretty cool.
I made him, so I can say it.
So what types of other people are you collaborating with to support these kids and adults?
Yeah. Yeah. So I am currently working with, talking about a collaboration with a local charity who supports underprivileged kids and does provide them with supports like therapy and things like that. So we're looking at how we can make that work. I've also been talking to some psychotherapists and people like that to kind of collaborate and see if we can give more of a wraparound to the family, a wraparound approach. And other than that, I'm actually looking at, I am going to. I just finished putting together my understanding behavior, kind of behavior 101 webinar, workshop, seminar. I'm hoping to put it out there online and in person and make it really accessible, meaning either low cost or no cost. And if there is a cost to it, all that's going to be is really part of it is going to be going to charity. And the other part will just be covering my expense of renting the room or whatever. Because I think I just want to get this out there to people, right? I want to get people to shift their thinking and shift their understanding of their loved one's behavior. That is really my mission with Spectrum of Light. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. We are pretty newly launched. And when I say we, I mean I. It's a one-woman show for now. And so I'm just kind of putting all these pieces into place. But I have been working with some parents, which is nice, and kind of coaching them along, seeing some differences. So that's been really cool.
Very awesome. With the rounding of the family with are you thinking like family therapy? Because the moment you said that, I was like, that's freaking genius. Because you have the caregiver who's directly dealing with whatever the behavior is, but you also have like the peripheral family members, siblings, for example. And I think stereotypically, those kids might miss out on some of the attention that is otherwise being expended, with the behavior that's happening. Are you seeing any of that in your role, helping with other kids in the family who might be, feeling neglected or any of that?
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily be part of the therapy piece. What I would be doing is working with a family who is seeking out therapy either for the whole unit or their loved one or themselves, and working on understanding their loved one a little bit better. With that being said, another one of my goals down the line in the next year or so is to offer these behavior 101 kind of workshops to family members, whether it's siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, just people who don't necessarily deal with it directly, to understand, right? And again, I live it. I also have a 13-year-old girl who will absolutely kill me for bringing her up, but I work hard on explaining to her kind of, because it's not fair. It's not fair that I always have to give him more attention. And she's amazing. She understands and she's all for it. But there are times where I do feel guilty, and I'm like, I appreciate that you did this, that, and the other because, your brother has a really hard time. So it's really working at helping the whole unit understand what's happening and why. And not just having the siblings see, well, mom and dad always pay attention to my brother because he has his tantrums, right? There's value to really understanding your loved one's needs, and that includes siblings, for sure. So we're not there yet, but we're working on it. It'll come.
It's not, I love that. And it's not even just that, they're able to deal with their sibling more easily. It's they're going to grow up to be more compassionate individuals, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Which we are learning now that there's been a lot of this neurodivergent stuff going on in the world for a very long time. We're only picking up on it now.
Sure. Yeah, like when we were kids, the class clowns, right?
Yeah.
Or those kids, like the bad kids, me with my air quotes, if you're not watching, air quotes. Yeah. But those were probably the kids that needed the extra help. Now looking back at it, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Or for me, I used to get crazy stomach aches all the time. As a grown-up, I know I have anxiety.
Yeah.
Now I know that was my anxiety. I had no idea. I used to sit there in school and just my stomach would hurt so much. And it's funny because what goes around comes around, and my daughter used to experience the same thing when she was younger. At the beginning of the school year, I would get phone calls home with stomach aches. I was like, oh, this seems really familiar. This feels like I've lived it before, right?
Yeah. If you haven't read it, you should totally go check out the Woolfield Poultry Collective.
Okay.
Very funny, but there's in the story, there's a 12-year-old girl and she has anxiety. There's things going on with her family and she always has these stomach aches and ends up passing out, throwing up, or going to the hospital. But it's just like
Oh no.
she's like, I have a stomach ache, and like
I will check that out. I'll ask you to send me the title of the book later. I can't speak anymore.
It's really cute and very funny. Oh, this is fantastic. Okay.
I will read that.
So what do one-on-one coaching sessions look like for parents?
Yeah. So it really depends on what you want. So we can get together in person, over coffee or on Zoom, or I can come to you. And it just looks like this. It looks like a conversation. And I usually start by, okay, tell me a little bit about what's going on. And as we kind of unpack things, I ask questions, right? I ask questions of, what happens when? So for example, if we're talking about tantrums, okay, great. What happens when there's a tantrum? What typically happens before there's a tantrum? What do you say when there's a tantrum? What do you do? What does your child do? Because I need to get a full picture of what happens. Sometimes parents do want me to come in and see for myself in their home, and that's fine too. I find that a lot of people don't like that. Just because they feel it's a little bit too invasive. So I really work the way that a family feels comfortable. I don't have one way of doing things. I'm not cookie cutter. And that's the way I've always done my job, right? So I kind of come to you in the way that you feel comfortable. And we just talk about it. And then I kind of say, okay, well, have you thought of maybe this? Do you think that this means that? And then, maybe the next session we do a little more deeper learning about, okay, well, here's what I think is going on. Here's what it means. Does that sound familiar? And we kind of unpack things that way. We talk about strategies that might work. Again, if you want me in your home showing you how to put them into place, I can. With some folks, you need some visuals, right, to help. So I can produce those as well and either role play with you on how to use them or come into your home and show you how to use them with your loved one. So it's really a vast array of ways to work with. So when I say one-to-one coaching, it really just means parent coaching as opposed to like a group session, which would be, a group of 3 to 5 parents getting the same kind of service, but tailored to their own loved ones. Or a workshop where, again, we have a group of parents listening to me speak about a subject and asking questions.
Yeah. I love that you used the word cookie cutter to describe how you don't do things, because I think just by definition, what you do requires you to not follow a cookie cutter approach. It'd be kind of ironic if you were.
I do things the same for every family. No, I don't. You can't.
And it works 60% of the time.
Exactly. No.
Exactly. I was just thinking about that because I'm going like in my head, I'm like even medication, like or surgery, there's a percentage of the time that it's going to work and a percentage of the time that it is not going to work. And I think about that for just people in general, because people who might, fall on the spectrum or qualify as neurodivergent or any of these things, they just don't interact with the world in the same way. And we expect them to, because we have carefully built how our society is. But I mean, so what?
Exactly. Well, and if you think about it, though, our society has changed so much, but it's still built to suit the mass, right? The mass pop, like the general, I guess, the gen pop, the general population. But when you think neurodivergent, people think, oh, it's got to be like a non-speaker. No, you never know. You don't know who's neurodivergent or who's not, who's got ADHD or ASD or whatever other, air quotes, developmental disability. And really all that really means, that big word, developmental disability, means your brain has a different way of thinking or functioning or what. It doesn't mean that you're any less than. You're not less than. And that's going to bring me to another tangent. But, my tangents, because that's just what I do. But honestly, like I've spent, much of the past 20 years just advocating, because all this terminology and all the lack of funding and lack of resources really make people feel like people who are, quote unquote neurodivergent are less deserving than, or are
Or it's a
less,
problem.
or the problem. Like
Yeah.
I believe that everybody, regardless of, um, your ability, your disability, your capability, I don't care who you are, everybody's got something to give. Everybody is just as an important part of our world and society as anybody else.
Mhm.
And I don't care if you are a kiddo or a person who can't verbally speak and who has big behaviors and who maybe can't, hold a quote unquote normal job. You have something to give to this world. You can be productive in your own ways.
Mhm.
And you should not be put aside just because you have differences. And that's our world does that, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, society does that, and it's heartbreaking for me because people are people, humans are humans, and we all have something to give. Like some
Yeah.
of the, like I said before, like the big scary dudes that I used to work with, like they made my heart so happy because they
Mhm.
are funny, or they're incredible with art, or like there's just so many hidden things that you would never know, and that doesn't mean they're less than, but
Yeah.
they often get seen as less than. So that's just another tangent I wanted to go on.
Yeah. Well, and that stuff absolutely drives me kind of nuts because
Yeah,
this
me
whole
too.
idea of a disability being bad. And I mean, I can walk upstairs because my legs work fine, but we don't actually have to have stairs. They don't
Correct.
naturally occur in the world that
Correct.
often, really.
Correct.
So, I'd be just as well off if I was wheeling myself around in a wheelchair. But the problem comes when I can't fit it through my door. I can't get into the washroom. I can't cook because the kitchen counters are too high. That's
Exactly.
when the problem pops up. And I just find it so interesting that we somehow managed to we've designed the world to be this way that completely excludes this group of people. And we're going to act as if they're the problem.
Well, the world is set for able people, right? So the Sophia that can walk,
Yeah.
would she really be any different than the Sophia that's in the wheelchair?
Nope.
No. Physically, she would be.
Yeah.
The world would change for her, but
Yeah.
you'd still be the same person. So why is it that we can't see that, right? So that kind of, I don't know, I get really upset, but
Yeah.
that's a whole other show.
The world is not designed well to accommodate everyone,
No.
which is really too bad. But maybe, it feels like a good-ish place to end this episode. But we're
Yes.
gonna talk for just a moment about if you have
Okay.
watched Love on the Spectrum or Down with Love or any of those things, because I just want everyone to go watch these things so that they can maybe learn to get out of their own friggin' way.
Yeah, so no, I haven't because I haven't had time, but it's on my list. I've heard they're great, but there was a show, and I don't know if it's Love on the Spectrum or a different. This was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it was on like CBC when I used to have time. But I did watch, like, I love that stuff because, anytime my husband will see like a show about people with disabilities on TV, he'll be like, babe, turn it on, right? He knows I love that stuff because I'm such a
Love that.
cheerleader. So it is on my list. Maybe March break. I don't know. Not that I'm not working, I am, but I might take a couple days to quote unquote hang out with the kids and maybe get some TV in.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. But yes, it's on my list.
The message in those shows is just great and also gives incredible insight into
Yes.
adults living with disabilities in air quotes and kind of blowing my mind, to be perfectly honest with you, because they talk about marriage, they talk about sex, they talk about having kids. And when I first watched these shows, I was like, never thought about people with autism or people with Down syndrome having children. But I guess they're adults, so they should do what the fuck they want, right?
Right. They're human beings.
Yeah.
And they have thoughts and feelings and hormones and needs and emotions just like everyone does. And when I was very new in this field, so we're going to go back 20 years, I promise this will be a quick one. I worked with a I guess he wasn't a kid, he was 19. I worked with a young man. This was in a group home, and again, nonverbal and all that stuff, super high needs and staff used to have to bathe him. And he would always get aggressive with female staff. always. And again, I'm so new, so green, and we would be like, why is this happening? He's fine with the male staff. He's not fine with the female staff. And I don't know who it was, but one day someone on the team said, have we ever thought about this kid who's 19 now being bathed by women and why that would be uncomfortable for him? And that was a turning moment in my life because I
Yeah.
went like, oh my God, it didn't occur to me. I
Yep.
would be uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
What makes somebody different,
Mhm.
right? And
For
that
sure.
just goes to show like everyone's got thoughts, feelings, emotions, needs, and all that
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Yep. And sort of, I'm going to word this horribly, but like keep your own to yourself. Don't put your stuff on someone else.
Yes.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
many ways. Yeah.
Because, watching these shows, which are like friggin' delightful to watch.
Okay, I'm gonna have to watch an episode today then, because now I'm like on it.
Well, first of all, the people who were cast are hilarious.
I heard.
And
Yeah.
fascinating and just so good. There's one guy on Love on the Spectrum, the American version, with this long blonde hair, and he just talks like this all the time. And I'm just like, he's like half of my friends from high school. I'm like, I love him so much. So good. His voice is always like, I'm so angry, but like the stuff that he's saying is like really funny. I just love it so much. And I just love watching it and going, yeah, I've never thought about, procreation with disabilities. I have not. And it's not my friggin' business. And, they're adults and
it happens.
Definitely know better than I do what's good for them. So, yeah, I love it. Love it.
That's awesome. Okay, well, I will have to get back to you with that and tell you how much I loved it, because I know I will, because I've heard enough about it to know. Yeah.
You're going to love it for sure.
I'm going to love it. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a ridiculously happy moment for us? Possibly after watching Love on the Spectrum and Down with Love?
Well, I was going to say after I watched those, then yeah. No, I have to say, like, for me, my heart is full when, those odd moments when my kids get along and love each other and hug each other, because that doesn't happen often. But really, for me, just there's been in my personal life, well, with my family life, just a lot of like ups and downs and like health stuff or whatever. So, when those kinds of things smoothed out a little bit and I was able to step back and breathe, that was a ridiculously happy moment for me when I kind of went, okay, we're good. We're okay. We're back in the saddle.
That first breath when your heart stops like racing and your whole body just goes, okay.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic feeling.
Yes. That feeling of, oh, I can breathe.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Mine is going to have to be that I actually, before you and I started recording, just finished recording an episode on creativity with my friend Lauren for her show, Lauren's Best. So I will link that in the show notes. She is a voice coach. She's done a previous episode on my show. Just fascinating. It was super fun to talk about creativity in different ways. So
that's exciting. I'll have to listen to that, because I may or may not listen to your podcast on a regular basis. I'm a fan, but whatever.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're going a little red. It's on my favorites list on Spotify. I'm just saying.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And I also wanted to say congratulations. And I'm so glad that you decided to go in this direction, because this is awesome. I haven't heard of anyone who is a caregiver coach. Like, I friggin' love it.
Thank you.
So good. You should be super proud. Are you super proud? Is your son like Mom?
I am. Well, my son just says that anyways, because again, heart of gold. He's such a good person. But I am. No, you know what? I came up with this concept a couple of years ago and really didn't know which way to take it. I had an aha moment. And I knew, because when I saw that there was a gap in the system and when I felt it as a parent, I was like, okay, this is it. So I am super proud. I have a website up now. I have social media pages. I try to post as regularly as I can and sprinkle some information out there. I write a weekly blog. And now I'm in a podcast sharing my knowledge. So yeah, super proud.
Where can people find all of these things? All of your social media and your website and your blogs?
Yeah, so my blog is on my website, which is spectrumoflight.ca. Super easy to find. I'm also actually, I just got on the Autism Ontario providers list, so you can search me up there as well. And my socials, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Spectrum of Light Support Services, in both. And I have an email that you can reach me out, which is spectrumoflightservices@gmail.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Spectrum of Light Support Services. So I'm pretty easy to find, and I try as hard as I can to just respond really quickly and support people as efficiently as I can.
Thank you so much, Ariela.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on this episode. I'm Sophia Lemon. I photograph ridiculously happy people, and you can find me at sophialemon.com, at ridiculouslyhappyppl on Instagram, and on Facebook and Pinterest. Has someone made you smile recently? Or maybe you're feeling proud of an achievement, or perhaps something just absurd or embarrassing has happened and you can't stop laughing about it. Head over to happyp.pl/record and tell us your ridiculous story. You may hear it on the next episode of the Ridiculously Happy People Cast. And if you've loved this episode but aren't ready to shout it from the rooftops, subscribing and leaving us a rating and a review will make us ridiculously happy. You can do that right in your podcast app. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay happy, and remember, life's short, but there's always plenty of time to be ridiculously happy.